Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we interview experts from around the world on subjects such as diversity, leadership, authenticity, and communication challenges. This is Latinx Heritage Month in America, in the US, and I am featuring a series of interesting experts who happen to have a Latinx background. Before I get to the interview, I'd like to invite you to see where your presentation skills are strong by taking our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where your presentation skills are strong and where perhaps a little bit of support could help you get the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. My guest today is Tricia Montalvo Timm. And Tricia is a corporate executive, board director, speaker, thought leader, and author. She's a first-generation Latina who rose through the ranks of Silicon Valley, advising high-tech companies, large and small, culminating in the sale of a data analytics software company, Looker, to Google for $2.6 billion. Tricia is a general counsel and a lawyer, and so she helped engineer that sale. She's one of the few Latinas to have attained the triple achievement of reaching the C-suite, joining the boardroom, and cracking the venture capital ceiling, where so few women get funded, so few Latinos get funded. It is a great achievement. Her career has spanned from working with some of the largest and most well-known publicly traded multinational companies in the world to stepping on as the first lawyer for several high-growth startups. She currently serves on the board at Selfacceptance, a business-to-business software company whose common experience management platform helps brand manufacturers, distributors, and retailers collaborate to win on the digital shelf. She's been recognized as a woman of influence and a Latina Business Leadership Award from Silicon Valley Business Journal and the title of Diversity Champion from the Silicon Valley Business Journal Corporate Council Awards. She's an advocate for women and girls and serves as mentor, advisor, and investor in female-founded companies. We had a great conversation about how you as a manager can foster inclusivity in your company if you have people who don't feel like they belong. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Here's Tricia Montalvo Timm. Tricia Timm, I am so happy to have you as a guest on Speakers Who Get Results. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Nice to be here.
Well, it's really fun to have people who are so smart and so interesting. And for this month, we are focusing on the Latinx Heritage Month, Latinos and Latinas with that heritage. And so you're somebody I wanted to interview anyway. And I said, perfect, we'll bring her in here.
Thank you.
Well, you have a lot of really interesting things to share. But before we get to that, let me ask you, who would be your dream interview? So if you could interview somebody who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
So the first person that popped to mind was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, affectionately known as RBG. I would say, yeah.
So the Supreme Court Justice, the late Supreme Court Justice. Yes.
Late Supreme Court Justice in the United States. She is just a trailblazer. As a lawyer myself, I really admired how, just her own, even just journey as an attorney, but then, achieving the highest position in the court as the only woman, having to overcome obstacles all along the way, and being a voice and being unafraid to ask the hard questions and challenge, and really brought women's rights issues to the forefront. So, I think I would just ask her, how she navigated being the only in the room, and, how
the only one, the only Jew also. Yeah.
The only Jew.
Or the first, woman. Let's say the first Jew.
Yeah. I'm not totally certain, but I think, myself being the first and the only often in the room, I just love to get tips and understand how others do it, because it's not easy.
Yes. Well, it's funny how we've been talking the phrase, the only one, the only woman, the only Latina, the only Jew, the only whatever, and what it feels like to be the only one. So I think that would be great. I miss her. I was such a fan of hers. I wish we had her back. I wish
too, desperately.
I desperately wish we could have her back. We still have the candle on the dining room table with her picture on it, and the votive candle praying for her. So yes, I would be at that one. Yeah.
Yes, and she still inspires us all. So
she does inspire us all.
Her legacy continues.
Right. So Tricia, can you tell us a little bit about, as a lawyer, you do so many things. We're talking about how a manager can cultivate inclusivity, a culture of belonging among their employees, especially if you're not the only. A lot of my clients are the only woman or the only female manager how can you make it easy to be included, and how can you be empathetic to the people in your employees, the people in your team who are the only? That's a great part of your work.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think one of the things is just to notice, who you are in that room. And if you notice that you're part of the dominant culture, whatever that is in that room, notice that everything is easy for you. You don't have to change anything about yourself. Everything around you is made for you to feel comfortable. So I think the first step is just like noticing, what your role is in that room. And then you can notice who might not feel comfortable in the room. And oftentimes, if in conversations, for example, as a manager, the person that isn't speaking up, that person is a great person to include in the conversation. Maybe bring them, lean into maybe what their opinion might be. And if you don't want to, ask them directly, another great strategy is to ask the group, what is the opposite here? If everyone's sort of giving the same opinion, let's think about what the opposite or the different opinion might be here as we brainstorm. Because that allows then that person that might be holding back what they want to say, to bring it forward. Another strategy I think also is create a culture where you cultivate storytelling. I think we really learn from each other and create empathy when we learn about each other's stories. Oftentimes we may be working with a colleague for 1, 5, 10 years, and you may know nothing about their, who they are, their whole full self. And once you start learning who they are, it starts breaking down some of those barriers, maybe some of those belief systems you might have about a particular, race, gender, sexual orientation, religion. because you know this person as a human being, as your friend, as your colleague, and now some of those unconscious biases you may have may start breaking down. So I think curiosity is another important piece as a manager.
Curiosity, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
How can you ask the people who are in the minority, how can you gracefully ask them to tell you if you've made an assumption that wasn't necessarily a good one, or wasn't necessary?
Yeah.
You assuming on the basis of your background?
Oh, that's a great question. I think oftentimes, especially as DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is something that's talked about more in companies, there might be some fear around getting it wrong. And I can tell you, in being in spaces, especially in the Black and Brown communities, where I spend some time, that we are okay with you asking the questions and trying to do better and trying to learn, and curiosity again. So I think if you can honestly just say, look, I want to get your name correctly. Can you help me pronounce it? Can you, I really, right, this week I know is Rosh Hashanah. Please tell me more about that tradition. I think people welcome learning about each other. And so I think if you're just kind in the way you ask those questions, and then really genuinely try to get it right, would be great. Pronouns is another perfect example. I think starting anytime there's a new group, introducing yourselves and asking people to share their pronouns.
That means,
right,
and by that you're talking about, am I a she
gender
and
pronoun.
her?
Yes. Yeah.
Gender
she, her,
specific?
he, him. Yes. She,
or
her,
they.
he, him, or they, them.
They, them. Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Which, yes, there are people for whom she or he doesn't really fit.
Yes.
And we're trying to do that. How do you help somebody feel more included if they are the only person? If they are the only person in their category? I mean, say you're the only Jewish person, or you're the only Muslim.
Yeah.
How do you, you mentioned that we are now recording this around Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, the Jewish high holy days, and talking about having having a Jewish holiday. There are places where it's not safe to do that.
Yes. So I think those are two questions in there. So one, how do you feel? How do you make people feel included? I think a lot of what organizations are starting to do, and I think is good, is cultural awareness. And they're intentionally really celebrating different customs, traditions in the workplace. And that really helps, because traditionally in the United States, for example, we celebrate Christmas, Easter. That was the predominant celebration. And so if you were Christian, you felt included. I mean, that, because those were the celebrations that you celebrated. But those that weren't part of those celebrations would then feel like they couldn't really take that time off, or talk about them, because nobody else around them was. And so when you just intentionally start bringing awareness to these different, not so different, just other celebrations, then the employee will be more comfortable sharing it. Now, if you find yourself in an environment, so that's great for the employee, right? So for example, me as a Latina, I love seeing I didn't have National Hispanic Heritage Month when I was going through my career. We never celebrated my heritage. It was never talked about in the workplace. So, I wouldn't share that, my mom loves mariachis and tamales, I wouldn't share that piece of myself, because I didn't hear about it. So, so it's nice for me to see this, right now. But let's say you're in an environment, because you said, is it safe? If you're in an environment where that is not happening, I think that's where you as an employee need to sort of recognize where you're at, because not all places are going to be welcoming and are going to be safe. And so, unfortunately, that's where, you have to sort of make a conscious decision of where you are in your own career journey. Is this a place where I do want to bring my full self and bring awareness to, my managers, or is that going to cause potential repercussions that maybe it's too costly because I'm the sole breadwinner and I need to just, maybe go along with it for now, but find a path to maybe a different job in the future, which goes to also my point of, if you don't, as an employer, if you don't start including all different types of identities, I think we're moving to a place where there's going to be a lot of mobility, because I think employees really want to be seen and heard.
Seeing someone and hearing them, who they really are, that's so important.
Yeah.
That actually leads me to another, a phrase that you use a lot and that a lot of people have seen, which is code switching, which started out as a linguistic phrase, but I'd like to hear your definition.
Yes, I didn't know about this term for the most of my career, and just learned of it a couple of years ago. And what it is the phenomenon of adjusting one's style of speech or appearance, behavior, or expression to conform to the dominant cultural norm. And so for me, how it showed up was I would, straighten my hair because that's what, I saw as a professional hairstyle. I would wear very conservative black suits because that is, what what
lawyers wear.
That's what lawyers wear, right? A lot of times speech is also changed in order to conform. So it's this constant changing who you are in order to conform into the workplace.
It kind of makes me think about when you're a teenager, you try to blend in.
Yes.
You don't talk about who you really are. You try to blend in with the popular kids, which is something I was never good at. And actually there were people who really wanted to hang out with me, but I didn't recognize that until afterwards, thinking, because I wanted to be one of the cool kids and I wasn't. And and I tried to change who I was. I think we all did. But when it shows up in the workplace, I think that goes back to this thing of safety you were talking about.
Yes. Well, what happens is if you constantly code switch, over time, I did it for probably 2 decades, and over time, it becomes emotionally exhausting. For one, because you're spending energy changing who you are instead of spending that energy creating, producing, doing the job. But instead, you're worried about how you're showing up and how others perceive of you. So it's I think it can be emotionally exhausting for a lot of people.
What if so as a manager, can you teach yourself to notice when an employee is not being authentic? Can you make that easier? Or is this something we have to do for ourselves?
It's both. I think that for yourself, I think it's your own self journey to self-acceptance. It's, really embracing who you are, acknowledging, why there may be reasons you were hiding, whether there's a safety issue, whether there's biases that are very real, and really giving yourself grace for why, you put on armor to succeed and survive, and that's okay. But recognizing that armor, might not be serving you all the time. So there's an own, for you as the employee, there's this own journey of coming into embracing who you are. And as managers, I think It is doing the work of recognizing how others may be struggling in the workplace. So, for example, if there are situations happening in the outside world, such as like recently we had a large anti-Asian hate happening, you can reach out to your Asian employees and say, I see in the news this is happening. How are you? Do you need some time?
Mm-hmm.
I think recognizing that while something may not be impacting you, it may be impacting someone from a different ethnicity or a different identity in a different way, and giving them space to process that. So I think it's just, continuing to learn and being intentional about it.
Mm-hmm. So you can reach out. You can train yourself to reach out.
Yes. Yes.
One of the things that I have found is to have an ally, so that you have somebody you trust, and someone who will say, "Oh, Elizabeth, that was a really," so Elizabeth, that sort of glare at me if I say something thoughtless. So my whole life, my big mouth is what has gotten me in trouble. So, I say the times I get in trouble is when I say something that I thought was going to be funny, and it just was not funny. And so if you can have somebody with you, around you, in your team, or a colleague who will say, you just watch out for each other and pay attention. Another thing I have noticed in so many areas is how important it is to be aware. Awareness is everything. So if you start noticing that there's something going on that is making people uncomfortable, rather than just living in your bubble where you think you understand everything.
I thought of another good tip. If a company has employee resource groups, one strategy we used at one company was, oftentimes you want to have an executive sponsor, right, for the group. And oftentimes they pick the person that shares that identity. So for example, at my last company, we had a mom's ERG, and the first go-to was, let's pick, the highest ranking working mom to be the executive sponsor. But we did the exact opposite, and we picked the highest ranking male, which was our CEO, to be the executive sponsor. And what that does is that he puts him in the room with an identity that is different than him. And so he sat and heard the challenges of working mothers in the workplace, what it was like to go out on maternity leave and fear that your job will still be there when you get back. The transition back into the workplace when you have a colicky, 3-month-old at home, and what that challenge might feel like. The struggle around benefits and infertility, medicine, all of it, he heard and sat in the room. And so when it came time for, let's look at, review the annual benefits, he now had a different perspective and can empathize. Well, how are our parental benefits for our employees? Let's look at them. And so it's, I think that's another way to really just learn about a different identity that you might not have had previously, and it creates more empathy.
And most of the time, so the ERGs are employee resource groups.
Yes.
You can also sit in on someone else's, on a group that you don't know. And you ask.
I was going to say, ask permission.
Ask, would it be okay?
They want to be safe.
I'd like to know more about my colleagues. May I join your group? May I sit in? May I listen? It is a way of, it's like guesting in another department and learning something about what makes the accountants happy. Things like that.
Yes. And one thing I'll say, another challenge lots of mixed race folks have is not belonging anywhere. And so you're not, for example, for me, sometimes I feel like I'm not white enough, or I'm not brown enough. But if you flip that on the other side, I call it the third space, which is I now can exist in both environments.
Mhm.
So the benefit of that, to what you're saying, is I hear both sides, and I understand and have the perspective of both sides, which has really helped me create empathy and allow me to really support and advise leaders as they think and walk through some of these difficult conversations.
Why does it matter? I've had people say, I don't understand what all the fuss is about. These have all been people who are white, comfortable, they have comfortable incomes, and they're part of the dominant culture. They don't understand why people make such a fuss. Why does it matter?
Matters for a lot of reasons. First of all, data shows that diverse leaderships produce better results. At the end of the day, from a business perspective, a diverse team will show you your blind spots. It will show you where you may not be moving into markets or directions that you need to be. So having diverse perspectives in a leadership team will just make for a better company. And how do you do that? Diversity is one piece of it. Inclusion is a more important piece of it, because you will not retain diverse talent if you haven't created an inclusive culture. So in order to create an inclusive culture, you need to foster a sense of belonging with all of your employees. And that's the hard part. That's where I think companies often fail, because they just say, oh, look, I'm just looking at the diversity statistics. I've hired some people, I'm good. And then they sort of, drop the ball on really the inclusivity piece. So I think putting time, resources, and tension into a sense of belonging will help with retention of this important employee base.
Well, yeah, now we are still in a situation where there aren't enough people who are willing to work, and companies are still looking for talent. I had a friend of mine who runs a restaurant was told that there was someone who had applied for a job as a waiter, but they wanted to work from home.
What? That works.
Right. So yeah, I'll be a waiter in your restaurant, but I'm going to do it from home.
It's just funny. I don't even know how that works.
She just said, yeah, well, maybe you shouldn't come in for that interview. But I just heard that one today. Where could someone start? What's a good place to, as a manager, if you want to learn more? There's a lot out there about how to be inclusive. What would be the first thing you can do?
So if your company already doesn't have it, I do think starting with training around unconscious bias is a good place to start, because many of us don't even know the biases that we might hold. And unconscious bias just means that there are beliefs that you hold that are unconscious around a particular group or identity.
So stereotypes.
And yes. And from there, creating a safe space for your employees. If you haven't created employee resource groups or other, I know a lot of companies use technology such as Slack and other places, communication tools, so that people from the same shared identity can create a community to support each other. I think that's, especially if there are only a few in the organization of a particular identity, then meeting each other and having each other is a really important benefit for them. And the third, I would say, is mentorship and sponsorship. Oftentimes, I was a first generation professional. My parents are immigrants to this country. And I didn't know what the protocols and, in the politics or all of the things, job interviews and all of the things to be a successful leader in corporate America. And as a Latina, unfortunately, I also didn't see or have any Latina leaders to ask for guidance. And so I really needed a mentor and a sponsor to show me the ropes. And I was fortunate to have lots of wonderful white male colleagues that sponsored and mentored me. And so I think that if, find that performer in your company, particularly the one that may not look like you, and sponsor them and mentor them and help them navigate, because they might not have sponsors that other folks might just naturally have.
That actually brings me to the subject of pipelines. I've been talking about this a lot lately, several conversations about how do you encourage and develop the leaders, the upcoming leaders, the next generation of leaders. And I know that the Latinx community has been very few in a leadership position. Do you have any thoughts about that and why that is and what we can do better?
Yeah, it's something I'm really trying to be more involved with. I think one of the challenges that we have as Latinos is we're diverse within our own, culture. So it's, Latinos come from all different countries, different dialects, different customs, some are first generation, some are immigrants, some speak Spanish, some don't. Some are white passing, some aren't. And so even within our own community, I think that we need to find a way to get together better. And I think we're trying to do that. And I think helping and supporting those in your organization, and let's just for looking at Latinas, to align themselves with those organizations that are supporting them. Because there is a very shared experience that we all have. I'm part of a few Latina organizations, and when we get on the call together, I mean, we have the same stories. All of us have been mistaken as, instead of leaders, as the assistant, or I've been mistaken as the nanny. You've got all these little things that, experiences that you've shared that help you as an employee really understand why you might have some of the imposter syndrome and other things that you might have. So I think just supporting them.
Okay. Tricia, I had so many things to ask you. Talk to us a little bit about what the courage it takes to be yourself, to be your authentic self, to claim who you are, maybe from your point of view. How did you manage to step into claiming your Latinx identity?
And, for me, it was very hard, to be honest. I grew up with a family who had faced a lot of discrimination. And so their message to me was, assimilate as quickly as you can, because that will make your life better. My parents didn't want me to suffer some of the pain they were suffering. And so I internalized that and really hid and downplayed a lot of that. So, when you put up all that armor for so many years, it's hard. And there's a lot of fear that you have, created over the years, especially if, for me, for example, if I was passing as white, I unfortunately found myself in many conversations where there were derogatory comments made about Latinos. And so I heard these things. So I've created fears around if I came out and said, this is who I am, that I would be thought of as lesser than, I wouldn't be respected, I wouldn't be invited into the C-suite, the boardroom. And so for me, it took a long process of sort of unpacking some of those external messages that I had internalized, truly believing that who I am and where I come from is beautiful, and that it's valued. And that's a lot, it takes a long time to really go through that. I created also a community of people around me that I could turn to when things maybe didn't go well. And I was rejected because I think you need a community, you need people and support system to get you through some of those tough times.
Yeah, this is so very interesting, Tricia. I'm really glad you joined us today. I hope we are evolving as a society, and the more people speak up about who they are, the better, because the more inclusive we can be. Certainly, the numbers show that if you have diversity, especially in your leadership team, that there's more profit. So companies that are intentional about diversity have better profit, better return on investment, and so forth. So this is an ongoing conversation. I think I'm going to have you back in a few months, and we'll talk about this some more and a little bit more about ways that we can be more inclusive and make sure that the people around us feel more inclusive. So
thank you.
So Tricia, Timm, thank you so much for having been a guest.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Elizabeth.
All right. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host. And if you liked us, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That's the one that really counts. Tell your friends, follow us on YouTube, subscribe, spread the word. We have great guests like Tricia. And if you enjoyed us, please go and learn more about us, spread the word. This has been Elizabeth Bachman. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.